Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Thursday, the 24th of April. Glad to see you here. I've been thinking about Pope Francis all week. I can't get him out of my head. I remember the day that he was elected, or it was announced that he was elected. I was coming home. I heard about it on the radio. I was coming home. I'd been at the chapel at King's College in Halifax for a Eucharist, and it was pouring rain. Rob was sailing. I was going home to an empty house and feeling overwhelmed. The Eucharist at that particular chapel was very, very high church, and I'd never experienced anything like it and felt very lost. The reason I was there was because in a few weeks from then I was going to be preaching in the chapel. I'd been invited by the chaplain to preach, and I wanted to be there a time or two just to see how things work. Where's the pulpit, things like that. Well, I came away feeling very discombobulated in that it was so high church that even I was uncomfortable with it, and I'm pretty open to things, but I was feeling very much like, do I even have the right to be there as a female priest? All my issue, not theirs. Nobody said that, but it was just the sense that everything there was very old school, we'll put it that way. And I remember driving home, and on the news came in breaking news that a pope has been chosen. And he's been Francis for so long, I can never remember his name. But they said who it was and where he was from, and amazing that he wasn't from Europe, where he was from. It was just, wow, okay. It felt like the whole world was changing. And considering where I was in Halifax. I had just started maybe 6 weeks ago, not even 6 weeks ago, in my parish at St. James in Halifax. We had just moved to Halifax from Ontario in the summer. Rob was sailing. It was our first deployment. He was gone. Everything was brand new. Everything was thrown into the world, like thrown upside down in my world. And now all of a sudden there's this new pope. And I liked Pope John Paul II. I did. Benedict, I struggled with. Um, so I had lived through in my ordained times. I remember when Pope John Paul II died. I was a priest. I was living in Stratford, and how difficult that was. And then living through Pope Benedict, who I felt like kind of sort of took things backward. Um, Although looking back, I can see why. And now that I'm a bishop, I get it. I understand that the decision making that we make when we're in leadership often has layers upon layers upon layers that other people can't see. And it's not always appropriate to explain why. Sometimes we just need to. So I can now look back on Pope Benedict and with appreciation. But when Pope Francis was elected, when he was chosen, I remember thinking, wow, okay, the world is being washed. It was pouring rain, like so hard my windshield wipers wouldn't clean it. And I'm driving through downtown Halifax trying to get to the Rotary, which is like a big roundabout. And I hated driving on them still. I wasn't very good at it yet. And just wanting to get home and get out of my wet clothes and want to process the Eucharist I had just been at, and how it made me feel, and why it made me feel that way, why I was nervous about being a priest. Been a priest for a long time at that point, but feeling very much like I wasn't good enough to be there in that place, even as a worshiper. And then to hear that Pope Benedict, who was very quite conservative in the way he dealt with the church, had been elected by someone who was known to stand up against regimes, to stand up and say no, who was coming from a different part of the world that I had learned a little bit about when I was in seminary because of the different theologies that were coming out of South America. So, like, my brain did a huge shift. And I began to understand in that moment that God works in mysterious ways. It's not always a beautiful picture because of the beauty of the painting, of the way things are obviously beautiful. But quite often the most beautiful things come in unexpectedly beautiful ways. Things we don't recognize, things that we wouldn't normally say, hey, that's beautiful. And looking back, I would not have said that my time in that chapel had been beautiful, nor the times to come. Just as an aside, when I did preach a couple weeks later, the bishop, or the chaplain had given me the gospel for the day, and I had prepared a sermon. And when I got there, completely by just he'd forgotten what gospel he'd given me, and they had been in the habit of using the gospel from the previous Sunday on that Wednesday or Tuesday or whenever the worship was. And they had used the Thanksgiving gospel of the 10 lepers, and the one who comes back to say thank you to Jesus when he was healed. That was not the gospel that I had been prepared for. And so I got up there and had to preach something that I wasn't prepared to preach. Um, it was difficult, it was awkward, it was embarrassing. Um, I wasn't doing this church at home thing yet, so I really wasn't used to speaking off the top of my head. And I never got invited back to preach there, nor did I ever go back to worship there, because I realized it was a place that I didn't feel comfortable, that I spent most of my time thinking, this isn't beautiful. And because I was thinking this isn't beautiful, I wasn't paying attention to what was. That regardless of what picture was being painted by the liturgy and the way that the people, usually men who were at the front and were leading the worship, I wasn't able to see the beauty of Christ in it. There was something in me stopping me from seeing that beauty because of my own prejudices or my fear of prejudices. And so I thought often about that. But that whole event, that whole time at that chapel has been changed through the years because of driving home that day at my sort of practice run at worship in the chapel and hearing that this new pope had been elected. And I'm not sure, I could be conflating memories, but there was some sort of guessing as to what name he would choose. And I think, pretty sure Francis was one of the ones that was sort of up in the air. But I remember thinking, when I did hear that he had chosen Pope Francis, thinking how perfectly beautiful that was. Francis of Assisi is one of my favorite saints, and his work with animals and loving people and taking care of people, as they were, not as they should be, not because they were rich, but simply because of who they were. And in particular, if I could be completely mistaken, but in my memory, I remember from my first parish in Stratford, where my congregation got involved with L'Arche Daybreak, or no, not L'Arche Daybreak, L'Arche in the community that was right next to our church. And that some of the folks from my congregation in later years went on pilgrimage um, with L'Arche to Assisi in Italy because of their connection there. And so Pope Francis carried with him hope and possibility and beauty. And I remember that in that rainy day, when in the 50 feet it took to get from my car to my house, and knowing that I had nowhere to go that evening, I was just home by myself in the big house, cold, wet afternoon, going into the house thinking, I'm soaking wet, I'm freezing cold, there's nothing for dinner, I'm home alone. And yet I think the world just changed. I think that God will use this Pope to change the world. And I think he did. I think that Pope Francis, with God's help, did change the world. I know he changed my world. And he helped me to see beauty in a new way. And I was reading the other day this short little prayer or passage, this poem called God the Artist. And it was written by Dag Hammarskjöld, who had been the Secretary General of the United Nations back in the 50s and 60s until I think he was killed in a plane crash in 61, I think. But he wrote this. It says, Thou takest the pen, and the lines dance. Thou takest the flute, and the notes shimmer. Thou takest the brush, and the colors sing. So all things have meaning and beauty in that space beyond time where thou art. How then can I hold back anything from thee? Beauty goes beyond the pen that creates the line, the flute that lets the note shimmer, the brush that makes the stroke. The beauty comes in the action itself, because the beauty leads to that place where God is beyond time. And the pen strokes, the music, the brush strokes that Pope Francis shared with the world, they are now all here for us for all eternity, as he is now with God in that place beyond time. And I thank Pope Francis for that, and I thank God for that. And I thank God for those moments of really having to struggle with understanding and finding place and feeling accepted and recognizing that my own judgment is the problem. not so much the judgment of others. And that sometimes it is in the darkest days, in the strugglingest moments, it is in the pouring down of the rain and the cold of an October day that the greatest beauty begins to grow. Indeed, the world has changed. That dark, cold, rainy afternoon when I learned that Pope Francis was to be the new Pope, the world changed. And I am still discovering how many ways that this particular Pope has helped me to change and grow in God's world. And so thanks be to God for the Pope and for rain and for chapels that made me uncomfortable. Because it's through the discomfort, often, that the beauty can be seen. Have a great day, everybody. God bless you. I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel.